Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for on and watching or listening on the podcast to this special edition of NBA Breakdown. This is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going through the daily slate of games. What I did was I spent a number of hours this morning just combing through all the scores and data and different things from Christmas up until now, which for most teams is 7 to 10 games, and trying to identify trends, quarters, totals, whatever it is that can help tip you off and tip me off on places we should be looking for angles that could be beneficial for betting. I got 10 trends for you today and one bonus one. And then at the end, I'm going to give you the opportunity to get access to my entire document that has over 150 different trends from Christmas up until now. So stay tuned for that at the end. I do want to say up front, this is obviously a pretty short-term group of trends that we're looking at. 7 to 10 games is not a massive sample size in the NBA. There are a couple even where that 7 to 10 doesn't matter as much. For instance, with Utah right now, where Gobert is out for the last few games, obviously they're a very different team with him and without him. There are other teams where that's the case. So take this stuff with a grain of salt. Like really, this should be one input that we can look at alongside a whole bunch of other things that can help point us in the right direction. It's definitely not a surefire lock of the century type of thing to use, but I do think it can be beneficial. Also, would love for you to subscribe, like this if you're on the YouTube channel, do this, leave a review. If you're listening to the podcast, appreciate that stuff. We're going to jump in and go through 10 of the over 150 trends here, and then again, give you a bonus one, and stay tuned to the end for a way for you to get access to all of these trends that I've got. So recent NBA trends, Christmas through January 12th. Today is January 13th. Obviously, the games haven't happened, so I can't include those. So we go through January 12th. First one, the Boston Celtics are 7-2 in the first half in the last 9 and 2-6-1 in the second half. When you look at the winning margin or losing margin in these two halves, in the first half, they've won by 5, 3, 2, like a lot of small numbers, but then they did win by 16, 26, and 11 in two of those. When they've lost those two, they lost by 2 and by 7. So especially that one that's 2, and this could be said on the other side as well, but when you lose by 2 points, obviously you're pretty close to winning. You hit one more three-pointer, you make one more stop. Same is true if you win by 2. You could have given up one more or, missed another shot. But just to say, that's a pretty strong trend in the first half for Boston over these last 9 games. In the second half, they have gotten destroyed a number of times. They lost by 19, 16, 11, but then had a few close games in there as well. 2, 3. There was one where they tied, another one with 3. So it's about half and half, I would say, in terms of the strength of this trend of them losing in the second half. Half the time they are getting beat badly, and the other half they're keeping it fairly close. But just as an example, as we go forward, I mean, it's probably pretty self-evident, but the way that you could use this is cross-referencing this with other teams, seeing what other numbers you want to bring in to kind of vet this and think that this is a helpful trend in a specific matchup. But if it is, you can look at betting the Celtics in the first half and then keep an eye out for betting the other team in the second half, especially if that tends to be a good spot for them, if the game progresses in the way that you think it will. So that's the first one. Next one up, a little bit surprising to me, the Brooklyn Nets, who have been a good defensive team for most of this year, have allowed 110 points in 8 of their last 9. The one game where they didn't allow 110, they allowed 108. So they haven't really shut anyone down over the last 9 games on defense. 2 of those games where they allowed 110 or more were against the Los Angeles Clippers, who are absolutely putrid on offense, and nobody should be allowing them 110 points. A few of these games have gotten away from them. There are a lot that are just over that 110, but 120, a couple at 121. 121 is the highest that they've allowed, so there is a fairly narrow channel here of about 10 points in terms of how much Brooklyn is allowing. But again, as you look at matchups that they run into, you can check and see how this affects what you want to do in terms of totals or how close you think the spread will be. Obviously, at some point, they're not going to allow 110 to 120, but that's why, again, these things are trends. And when it's 8 out of 9 and the other one was 108, that's a pretty strong trend, a spot that they've been living in for the last couple weeks at least. Next one up, the Charlotte Hornets have allowed 110 or less in 5 of 8. Now, you might say, why in the world would I share a trend that's only happened 5 out of 8 times, barely over 50%? Well, here's the reason. One of the things I'm looking for in these trends is things that go against the prevailing narrative. Before Christmas, Charlotte had a number of people out, and they were absolutely smoking on offense. They had super high totals, and they were hitting them most of the time. More recently, while that still, I think, is people's perception of the Hornets, it just hasn't been true. They've had a couple games where they've gone over a total, but more often than not, they're staying under. One of the other games, one of those 3 that was over 110 was only 111. So another one was really close. Their last 2 have been 98 and 99. Before that, it was 106. There's a 108, another 99. So one of the things you can look at in the near term is considering taking Charlotte unders, whether that's team total unders or the full game under, because they've just been playing a lot better defense, and they've actually been scoring less too. We're not going to focus on that one for now, but this is one that goes against the sort of the narratives that are out there, and something you want to watch over the next week or two, because at some point it's probably going to change again. But right now, that's what's been happening. Next one up is the Denver Nuggets. They are 6-2 in the first half and 0-8 in the second half straight up. In the second half, they've scored 55 or less in 8 out of 8 games. So obviously that's a big contributor to the fact that they're losing in the second half every game. And they're losing pretty decisively. There's one game where they only lost the second half by 2. All the others are 5 or more points. So they're not within a bucket of winning in the second half. In the first half, on the other hand, they lost one of the 2 that they lost by 1 and the other by 9, but they have wins of 12, 12, 13, 22, and 24. The other one is 9. So the wins that they've had in the first half have been really decisive on a consistent basis. And their second half losses have been pretty decisive as well. I think without too much work, you could figure out what you might want to do with that from a betting perspective. We move on to one of the best teams in the NBA, the Houston Rockets. They're obviously not, but we don't care because we're looking at betting and not necessarily how good a team is. So the trend here, the Houston Rockets have allowed 30 or more in the first quarter in 9 out of their last 10 games. And they've scored 25 or less in the second quarter in 6 out of their last 10. I put those 2 up there because they kind of combine to lead to this other one, which is that Houston is 1-9 straight up in the first half over their last 10. They're 1-8-1 in the second quarter. And so this is one where you have to be careful because obviously there's a spread involved with Houston pretty much all the time. We're not looking at these just straight up. But it's a lean that you could look at. In terms of those first half numbers, a lot of their losses have been big, 12, 21, 20, 22, 14, 14. And there are a couple that have only been 1 and one that's been 4. So, I'd say maybe 30-ish% have been relatively close in the first half, but the other 70% have not been close. And so that's a spot you might want to consider looking at the teams that are playing Houston in the first half. Next up, we have everybody's favorite, the Los Angeles Lakers. They've scored 30 or more in the fourth quarter in 6 of their last 8, and they're 7-1 in the fourth quarter over those 8 games. Again, there's a lot of obvious correlation between some of these different trends that are there. If they're scoring a lot or not scoring much, that's what's going to really contribute to whether they're winning in specific quarters or not. But LA has actually started off decent in the first quarter. That's some other trends that are out there. Then they've struggled in the middle of the game and tended to finish strong. So again, as you look at the teams they're playing, this is a potential opportunity to look to the Lakers to finish strong with live bets or things like that. Next one up is the Memphis Grizzlies, the hottest team in the NBA as we speak. Memphis, it's interesting. They've allowed 102 to 108 points in 6 of their last 10 games. So this is a very narrow channel for that many games, 6 of them, to be within 5 or 6 points of each other. The interesting thing on top of that, though, is that in the other 2 where they've played away, they allowed 113 and 118. But in the 2 where they played at home, they only allowed 99, and the other one was 80 something. 88 was the other one. So they've lived in that channel, but away from home, there's a higher chance that they're going to give up more points. And when they're playing at home, there's a higher chance they're not going to give up as many. So like today, they play Minnesota, something to consider. But the majority of their games, and the reason that I like trends like this, especially as we can widen them out to a little bit wider sample, is when you're trying to estimate overs and unders, it gets really tough when there's a ton of volatility. So you can look at the average number of points allowed by a team, but if they give up 120 and then 95 and then 116 and then 88, it's not helping you to determine over and unders very well. If you're just using the averages, it's going to throw you off. So anytime we can find these channels where a team is allowing or scoring in the same range on a consistent basis, it gives us a little bit more probability to look at their over or under. Next trend up is the New Orleans Pelicans. I picked them because they just beat my Timberwolves. But in the third quarter, their total has been over 57 in 6 of the last 8. Again, this is one where I'm trying to go against the prevailing narrative because the Pelicans are thought of as a team that doesn't score much. And it is true that they often don't score a lot, but they do have the ability to put up a decent number of points. And if you look at their third quarter, they tend to score more and give up more than in any other quarter in those 2. And so when you look specifically at the totals in those games, there are, none of them under 50 and 57 or over in 6 of the last 8. And so the third quarter is a spot where we could expect them to actually score some points and allow some points as well. And with a team that isn't expected to score much, that could potentially give you an edge when you're looking at quarter betting. Next to last regular trend here is the New York Knicks, who have allowed under 100 points in 7 of their last 8 games. Just filthy. They did allow 120 in that game where they allowed over 100. But this is one that actually jumped out at me. I had thought about the Knicks as being really bad and not being able to score. But the reality is they've scored better, like they've scored more points than they've given up. They actually have done okay in a handful of games on offense. But on defense, I mean, these numbers are as good as or better the Dallas Mavericks, who recently I touted as being this great defensive team, who then didn't go play great defense against New York. But the point is here, we've got a pretty strong sample size now, 9 out of 10 games, under 100 points. That's absolutely something to keep an eye on. And the last one is the Phoenix Suns. This is another one of those with correlated trends. So they've allowed 23 to 26 points in the fourth quarter in 7 of their last 8. So again, this is that channel that we're looking for. They've scored 27 or more in 7 of their last 8 in the fourth quarter. And they're 7-1 straight up in the fourth quarter. Again, this is to be expected because if they're generally holding teams to 26 or less, and they're generally scoring 27 or more, what's the outcome? Obviously, they're winning in the fourth quarter. But when you look at the distribution of how much they're winning by, that's the thing that to me is interesting. Twice they've won by 2. So again, those are close and nearly a coin flip. When they lost by 4, so a little bit more. But other than that, so in about half of them, it's been 6, 8, 8, 14, and 13. So half the time they're winning decisively in the fourth quarter. And in the other games, it's generally staying pretty close where it looks a little bit more like a coin flip. All right. I told you I was going to throw in one bonus trend, and I'm throwing this one in because I just thought it was kind of fun. You find these quirky things when you're looking through all the data. And so this one, I don't know what you do with it too much, but in the last 8 games in the first half, Charlotte scored 64 exactly 3 times. They scored 47 exactly 3 other times, And then one of the two where they didn't, they scored 65. So they almost hit that 64 a fourth time. Now, these are far enough apart, it's hard to know what to do with them in terms of any kind of betting. But I just thought it was really amazing that a team could hit two different numbers 3 times each in 8 games. So pretty phenomenal for Charlotte. All right, that is the recent trends that we were going to look at. Now, the last thing is I told you that I had over 150 trends that I found. And I will say that this is something, if it's helpful to me and helpful to others, that I'll probably do again every couple weeks. Look at whether these trends are continuing and then look at what new trends are coming up. And so if you want access to this, I'm going to actually just share a snippet here with you quick so you can see what it looks like. So hopefully you can see that. You can see it's got the team, the percentage that the trend is hitting at. It's kind of color coded from red, orange, yellow, and green in terms of the percentage that it's hitting at. There's the trend itself and then notes that I made. So things like understanding, if something hits 7 out of 8 times, what happened that 8th time? Well, that's in these notes. So you could scroll through these, and when you have a couple teams playing each other, like Minnesota and Memphis tonight, I looked through this document and said, hey, are there any recent trends that are correlated that might give me some insight into what could happen in the game today? So if you are interested in getting access to that and getting access to future versions of that, as I continue to do it, here's what you need to do. I need you to either subscribe to the YouTube channel or go leave a review for the podcast. But all those links are in my Twitter profile at NBA Attack, just like that right there. So go click on those, do one of those 2 things, and then either send me a direct message on Twitter, or you can email me at bigtastysports@gmail.com. bigtastysports@gmail.com. So either one of those things, and then hit me up with a DM or an email, and I will share the link with you so that you can sort through all this stuff, and then we'll keep you on the radar for when we update these things in the future. Hopefully this gives us one more input that adds to our success in betting and our understanding of what's happening in the NBA. Thanks for checking out the video. Hope it's been helpful, and I will